Greetings and welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel. Today we're going to be continuing our journey in buckskin sewing. So if you followed along with the channel for any length of time, we have a whole big long playlist on making buckskin and a couple other leather tanning techniques. Then starting with sewing, we started with some of these leggings on a very, very traditional pattern approach. Kind of full tutorial on these guys. And that's full tradition. We also have on the Patreon, if you want to wander over there, there's one of the projects I've been working on is a compilation of historic resources, re-indexed, re-digitized, re-put together in a new book format, and that's free to all patrons, which covers quite a few of this sort of sewing pattern, right? This idea covers a lot of different styles of full traditional clothing. But from there we've been going on to talking about taking a modern pattern and converting it to use with this very traditional material. Okay? And that does require a little bit of modification. Not so much in the engineering of the pattern, but modification of your forms to accommodate the stitching techniques and the peculiarities of leather, which are different, of course, than the peculiarities with cloth. And this is what we're accomplishing in this particular video, finishing up the front panels of this safari shirt pattern. Okay, so we talked about the initial pattern modification in the first video in this series. Link at the top of the screen if you want to start at the beginning of the story. If you're new to the channel, this is the first video you saw. And then in this video, we're talking about these pockets and setting all of this up. Okay. Now in the original cloth pattern, you know, these were not single flap covers and single flap thicknesses, right? They were doubled, sewed with a hidden seam, turned in, and then sewed onto the front of the shirt. But leather is different. Leather does not unravel, and leather is very, very thick compared to cloth, right? Even the thinnest leather is heavier than canvas. Mm-hmm. So you do not want to take this, double it over to a hidden seam, and then sew it back on top. You're just going to have
a wad of leather.
A shield. You're going to have a shield and not a pocket. Shields make bad pockets, okay? So we want a pocket, not a shield, right? So, you know, this is reduced to a single thickness. That's a little bit easier. But then there's a little bit more to think about, you know, making a nice seam, okay, with this thong lacing. We demonstrated this stitch in the first video when we did this section, here and there, okay? Now we left this middle open, and now we fill it up when we put the pocket in. And then down here on this one, where this is a larger pocket that can accommodate a lot more and then needs a more secure fastening, we have this flap added, and instead of a button, I use this Spanish lacing to make a little applique, which makes it just thick enough that it lodges a little bit there, so you need to go in with your finger and pick it out. Okay? So it's easy to undo, easy to remove that flap, but there's just enough resistance that if you have something, you know, heavy in there, that it's not going to pull the pocket open and fall out. Okay. And it looks quite nice. And that's also thinking about reducing thickness and complexity of the leather sewing, right? When you're working with leather, thickness has to be managed, right? When you're working with cloth, edge raveling has to be managed. So it's a slightly different thought process. But again, none of this is substantively altering the engineering of the pattern. Okay? We did add an extra yoke up here. We talked about that in the first video. Right? Again, it's just a two-patch patchwork, not substantially altering the engineering of the pattern. Okay? So that's the first front. Here's the second side. And then also in this video, we're going to add this little diamond weave applique, and that is covering up a little hole. Okay, so this and the Spanish lacing are the two new stitches that we're introducing in this video. So I hope that you will come follow along and join in and get some inspiration for your own leather projects. Let's dig into it. This is how the pocket attachment looks when it's done. The stitch coming and meeting at a nice, true 90-degree angle. Okay? There's a little bit of puckering here. That's because you have to remember, this is just another one of those differences between leather and cloth. Cloth is made in flat sheets on flat loom surfaces. Leather is made in irregular sheets on round animals. Okay? It's not completely flat. No matter what you do, it's not completely flat. And this pocket is cut out of a corner. So this is some belly skin. Put the thicker edge to the top, right? Because this is where it's going to get stretched when you're putting things in and pulling them out of the pocket, right? So you want to put the thick edge at the top, which means the thin edge and the woogetiness is going to be in the bottom. So it's got a little puckering there, right? Mm-hmm. That's normal, that's expected, that's part of the material. You know, it's the material had a life literally before it was a material. Now, this one isn't all the way done, and I wanted to show you this intermediate step so that you can see we are doing 3 complete runs, right? 1, start at the top, move to the bottom, quit. Start at the top, move to the bottom, quit. And you can see here on the back, you have 2 starts and then 2 tail ends woven in. Okay? Start, stop, start, stop. That is what lets us get that nice, true 90-degree and manage the length of our thonging, because it does stretch out and wear in a braid the more the more times you pull it through all these little holes. So, double advantage there. You can see this is, again, thin edge at the bottom, thick, even, rugged edge at the top, and, you know, this will flatten out, but there will be a bit of puckering at the bottom of this one as well. It's part of the character and nostalgia of the material. Accept it. But I did want to say a couple things about this while you can see it here at an intermediate stage. One is the end 2 holes are off the edge of the material. You can see that there. This hole is punched through the pocket. That's by itself here along the edge, just like that row is. Okay, but then this hole is not punched through the pocket material, just through the main shirt piece. Okay, and that is just lapping over. This little square of pocket material is loose, and these stitches just lap over it. Okay, but they do a very good job of holding it down, so that's not a worry. The second thing I wanted to mention is when we start this next run inside of the pocket, we're going to reuse these 2 holes on this side and these 2 holes on that side. Okay? So if I go ahead, start this here, this one's being a little bit recalcitrant there. I'm not going to show this whole seam, just this little bit of it. Each of these seams, by the way, is taking me about an hour. This is a time-consuming stitch and process. But I do believe that the results are worth it. Okay, so I came up through there, the second stitch back here. Now, is this in view, beloved? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to widen this hole. This already has 2 passes through it. So I'm going to need to ream that out and stretch it a little bit there. It's my bone awl. There we go. I'm just pulling a little at a time. Get this all arranged. Arrange the back again a little. Take your time, get it right.
Don't be hasty, little hobbit.
Don't be hasty, little hobbit. Traditional skills take time. So that's the third pass in this hole. Now we're going to cross over. Ouch. Poke myself, being clumsy. There. I usually do this on my lap, but I think it's easier to see in the film here, a flat surface. Get comfortable, however it works for you. That's the right way for you to do it. Okay. Going down through this one. This is a new hole. Okay. So there's our first X. But now we need to back stitch into this hole one more time. That's a very congested little spot. Just open it up again. Try not to tear it too much, not to open it any more than absolutely necessary. One of these wide awls or bodkins, you can get in there and just rip right through your leather if you really try to. Okay. Now when I'm pulling these snug, you don't want to pull a pucker in the leather. I like to hold my thumb on the back of the stitch and just pull flat across that way. Okay? Just till it's snug. And that'll hold. Now we'll do our next stitch across. Okay? And then that concludes our use of those already used 2 holes. So this stitch will back stitch here and then to cross into here, which will back stitch to this hole and then cross to that hole. Okay? So we're now past. But when we get to this end, we will again use these 2 holes to connect there. And that's what gives us this nice, even, non-obvious intersection. It's a seamless seam junction. Go figure that out. So I'm not going to spend an hour here showing you this whole stitch across, but I did want to show that step because it's important if you want to get a nice 90-degree junction there to put it together this way. So I'm going to continue this, and then I will show you lining up and setting up that pocket flap. I've started the layout on this pocket. Can I see what's on? Okay, thanks. And again, this is just measuring out the stitches so that they're evenly spaced, because we definitely want that on this sort of exposed stitching, decorative stitching type of pattern. And I pre-punched all the holes. Now, the layout in attaching this to this seam at the same time bears a little bit of mention. If you look at the back of this, we have an even row of holes here and an even row of holes here, the same spacing as all these others. Okay. On the front, we have 2 slightly different scenarios. When we go in the bottom line of holes, we're going to be going through the pocket, okay, and stitching over the edge of this yoke piece. And then when we go through the top holes, we will be stitching through the yoke piece and the back, but not through the pocket. Okay? So in the bottom hole, we're going over the edge of the yoke through the pocket. On the top, we're going over the edge of the pocket through the yoke and through the back piece. So both stitches, we're going through 2 layers of leather, but they're different 2 layers of leather. So if I just start this, and again, just like we did here and here, we're going to reuse these 2 holes to make a nice even connection. So it won't be obvious that we started and stopped. I mean, if you flip it over, you can see all the tie-in places, but,
From the outside, that's not visible.
Yeah, nobody's going to rip your shirt off and go and look and see where you start and stop your seams, right? That's not rational. And if somebody does, you have bigger problems than them noticing your seam, right? Just saying. So we'll set this up. Start through here. Second hole. Okay. Stop at the tail. Make sure we get this lined up. Now the second hole in the shirt is the first hole in the pocket. And that wanted to tear a little bit more than I wish it had. With a lot of this, getting started in a seam is the trickiest part. Okay, get that arranged. Pull through a little too much. Okay, now we're going to go through the old hole here.
To anchor it.
Anchor it. It's going to be a little tricky because this is a very thick piece of leather there. Especially when it's hard to pull in little, get the right one, pull in little short tugs.
So you don't rip the thong.
So you don't rip it.
Mm-hmm.
As otherwise, you'll pull through a section that's pulling easy, hit a section that's pulling hard, to just keep on pulling, and your thong's in two pieces.
Question.
Yeah.
Why aren't you going through the actual flap?
We are on this row.
Okay.
That stitches over the top and hides the seam.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay?
All right.
See, on this row we go through the flap. On this row we hide the seam over. Otherwise the seam would stick out the back. Mm-hmm. Now you could make that choice. That's a choice. Okay. And there's our first X. So now just like before, we go through this hole again. That hole ends up getting 4 stitches through it. Yeah, see how this is sticking out?
Mm-hmm.
Right, we don't want that on the show side.
Gotcha.
That's why we're stitching over the top. Now, if you wanted to fringe this, you might choose to go through the flap and leave some extending as a fringe. But yeah, that's a very good question. Like, why do it this way? And the answer is just to cover that seam. You know? Okay. Same here. That's why I'm stitching over the edge of this. If you wanted, this would be a good example. If you wanted to do this, so that there was, instead of a pocket here, you wanted fringe along that line, you could just leave this extend another 2 inches down, stitch this along, and then fringe it. Or use any other stitch that you wanted. And we'll continue to show some more stitches as we go through this project. We broke this thonging. This is going to happen, right? And sometimes you'll want to deliberately have a seam with multiple pieces of thonging as you go along, just so that you're not trying to work with a ghastly long piece. And, when you're cutting this, you may not have a piece of leather to cut a ghastly long piece of thonging out of, right? So knowing how to join this mid-seam is a good thing to know. So first off, we're going to take and we're going to punch a hole in the piece of broken thonging there, okay? Now, you want this hole positioned so that in the next stitch, it's going to be entirely on the back side. Because once we do this, you won't be able to pull that back through a hole, okay? That's the end of the line for this piece. Now we're going to come and we're going to make a matching hole in our repair piece, okay? Now we're going to thread these into each other. So first I'm going to take the broken piece and thread it through the repair piece. Okay. Now I'm going to take the repair piece, open that hole up a little bit, and very carefully and I do mean very carefully because this is an inherently weak structure that we're working with now. Okay. Pull a little bit at a time the repair piece through the hole in the torn piece.
Don't be hasty, little hobbit.
Don't be hasty. No, don't be hasty, little hobbit. And now these are locked together. Okay. And our next stitch is getting forhoodled here. Our next stitch is a back stitch. So I'll widen that hole a little bit. Tuck it on through. Go. And then pull the new piece on. Just want to make sure, as always, you arrange it nice. Okay. There's our back stitch. And then we can take the ends and weave them into existing stitches just as we normally would. Okay? Mm-hmm. And now all of this nonsense is behind. You can't see it here on the front. And we are back to stitching our pattern as though nothing happened. Okay? Now, I broke this back here on the first stitch and I carried it all the way through to the end point of that piece of thonging. You want to do that because you want to make this, you can't guess where this repair is going to occur. And once you've made the repair, this section is now completely locked in place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can't change it. So you want to make sure all of that is right, all of that is good before you put the new piece in. There is some color variation here. There always will be from piece to piece when you're dealing with this sort of home tanned leather. And you just have to, if you want to work with this material, you're accepting that as a nostalgia point, right? It's just part of it. The colors of all of these will fade and we'll get more and more even color as the pocket material and this thong are darker than the rest because they have a little bit more of the smoke, the soot from the smoke sitting on the surface, and that will wash off as it's cleaned and worn and wear off. And they'll become a more even, much lighter color over time. And if it annoys you, you can always make your shirt and then dye the whole thing as a last step. But I like it. Honestly, I like it. I like the color variation because you can't get that from machine process. So clearly labels is something that was done at home. And just to show, this one is done all the way across. So you can see how that works out. Here we have one more layer of leather, i.e. the flap, in the middle section than we do on the two sides. So you can see that it's a little bit poofier through the middle. There's a little bit more oomph there. Mm-hmm. And it did take a little more thonging than normal, right? I made these, I always make them, for this stitch, the thong is 6 times the length of the seam to be sewn, plus a skosh, because, I may need to trim the end a little bit. And this one, because it had a little extra to wrap around, it used up a little more length, and I barely had enough to tuck it in under on the end of the stitch, right? So leave a little more as you get more layers of leather. Leave, instead of 6 the length of the seam, if you've got 4 or 5 layers, do 7 the length of the seam. Okay, so just a note on there. I'm going to get on with finishing this pocket, and then we'll address the big pocket. We're going to do some fancy stuff there. At this point, we want to start looking at the big pocket. And we want a big, baggy cargo pocket that's very useful. The sort of pocket that you can, go and gather stuff and supplies out in the woods or put tools in if you're, sitting doing something. We want a big, mean, real pocket. Okay. I've modified the pattern a little bit. The original pattern is just that much, just a regular flap, such as we did in the upper pockets, the smaller pockets. Okay, I just drew on my own a tongue, and I want to have an attachment that can expand with it as you fill it with stuff, right? Pockets are there to be filled with stuff. Including on women's clothes. Give our sisters their pockets back, please, world. Anyway, to have a pocket that can slide and adjust, I'm going to put a flap across, a little strap here, and then this can move, such as I've done in this bag. This bag isn't totally finished, but you can see how we've done that little flap. But we don't want the flap to come all the way out of the strap, right? So if you imagine this here, we want a little bit of a stopper that will catch and resist pulling all the way out until you manipulate it a little bit to push it through the strap. I was thinking for a while about how to do this. Should I, you could sew a button on there, you could do some sort of little embellishment. There's a lot of things you could do. But I don't want it to be, this is a shirt. I don't want it to be just inherently heavy the day it's made. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a variant on the theme of what's called Spanish edge lacing. And we're going to do a leather thong lacing pattern to make this circular button that will then catch on the little strap that we sew across. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we need some holes. This is my modified pattern, right? You can see that's the original edge of the pocket, and I just drew this and move this slope from about there to about there, right? So I edited that a little bit. Just eased the corners so it's not square. Square corners don't look good on organic objects, okay? And then here at the bottom, I just traced 2 circles, and there's 8 holes around. So I just drew across, put a hole in the end, and then eyeballed the middle in between those 2, compass points, and then came in a 1/4 inch and just drew dots, made sure they were right, and then punched them. Okay? Now, if we carefully position this pattern on top of our piece, we can take a couple of our handy dandy little magnets, secure that on. Again, how did they do this in the real old days before they had handy dandy magnets? Friends, an extra pair of hands. Okay. But if you're doing this and you don't have friends or family members that are willing to sit there and help you hold your pattern for hours on end, which is probably the case because you're not, snowed in for 3 months at a time, get some magnets. And now we can just go right through and punch all of these holes. Okay. Make sure after each hole you punch that you don't shift the pattern. So make sure it's adjusted. I am using my steel awl, and the magnets are being a little greedy, wanting to steal it from me. But that is a minor inconvenience. And again, these are, I've talked about these before. These are just flat cowl magnets, and they're like $2.50 new. So you don't want the used ones if you know what a cowl magnet does.
No.
Okay. So there we have transferred our holes. Okay? Now we need to start our stitch. We have a piece of thonging prepared. You want to cut thonging for this particular project especially that is an even width and an even thickness. I see a little spot I need to trim here because buckskin does stretch a lot, and when it stretches it thins down. So you can see on this one I was really next level OCD about cutting this the same width. But you can see here in this section it stretched on me, and when it stretched it narrowed, so my pattern's not even all the way around. Now I'm okay with that, right? This is sort of a semi-rustic style of thing, so that's fine. But you want nice consistent work, so try to cut your thong from a nice consistent piece of hide. Now we're going to do an attachment here where we pierce the thonging. And now for this particular pattern, the thonging goes to the top. I'm going to start at the bottom of it. I'm going to go down. This is currently grain side up, flesh side down. Pass the thonging through the inside hole of our ring. Okay? And now I'm going to come back to the top through the outside hole of our ring. When you're doing this little bit especially, and especially in these first two holes, we're going to end up going through these two holes more than once. And these holes are fairly close together. So we do not want to stretch these any more than absolutely necessary. Okay? Now while I have a lot to work with, I'm going to widen that piercing just a little bit. Pull this through there. Now I want to adjust it so that is right at the surface of the leather. You want to get that piercing very well centered. Trying not to get my fingers in the way. Let's see what I'm doing. Okay. And then we want to just wiggle it, wriggle it, and adjust it so it's right there at the top of the outside hole. Okay? So there's our start. That's an attachment. As we go around, we're going to take this little dangle end there. We're just going to stitch over top of it and you'll never see it. Okay? So we take our thong. We need to widen this initial hole up again and get it back down the back side. Doing this piercing through the thonging is my modification to the original published pattern for this, which by the way is from this book right there, Leather Braiding by Bruce Grant. This is a really good reference for these sorts of thong sewing stitches. The stitch we've been using to sew the pockets on is in that book called the S-type applique lacing. Other references I've seen call it a herringbone stitch. In the original pattern as Bruce Grant published it, this tag end is just sticking up here and you lace it in, but this is going to be shoved in and out and there's going to be a lot of abrasion there, so I just want to do a little extra attachment. So that's my modification. So now we're back down in the back, right in the hole where we started. Now the next stitch is to come through. You can stitch this in any direction you'll want, it doesn't really matter. To come through the next hole over on the outside. Okay? Now here's where we start to weave a little bit. We're going to come under that initial stitch. being a little bit stubborn. There we are. Okay. And we want to come through the loop that we're making and out to the outside. Now I got a bunch of twist in there because I keep flipping it to try and both work and let you see what I'm doing. Everything takes twice as long when you're filming it, trust me. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we sort of tied half of a granny knot there. We went over, through, and then out, and our running end is pinched down to the outside. Now we're going to come back, try to do this with less twist this time, back over, and down the corresponding inside hole. Okay. Now we are back to the starting point. Our standing end is on the back side and is just passed down through the inside hole. So now we're going to come back up out the outside hole. I do love this bone awl for feeding this thing through. And I am feeding it through instead of using a needle for this stitch because I don't want to widen the holes. And now the same deal. Again, I want to straighten it out. Feed it under the topmost loop. When you're doing stuff like this, a good strong pokey stick is a very useful thing. Very, very useful thing. Different sizes of pokey stick. Okay. Now don't pull it too tight. As you can see there, this stitch is wanting to roll up on me. Got to straighten that back out. Okay. And then again, we're going to come over top and go back down. That hole. And there's our cross piece there. Okay? Now you can do this. I'm doing this round. You can also do this flat like on the sample piece and you can see the pattern that it forms there. This is my little practice scrap. Make yourself a practice scrap and practice your stitches before you go and do it on the real thing. And it comes out a little bit flatter and a little bit more, it's a little easier to keep regular when you're doing it flat than when you're doing it round. But it's the same stitch. Then on the back we have the diagonals, okay? On the front we have the raised weave. Right, front we have the raised weave, back you can see the diagonals starting to form, raised weave, and the diagonals going all the way around, okay? I am going to keep stitching around till we get to the end and then I'll show you how we finish it off. We've gone all the way around and we have used all of the holes that we have. Now, if this was straight pattern, like this one, right? If I look at the back, we've gone all the way around, we come to the last hole, you would just take this, feed it under there and tuck it and be done, right? If this was an applique, just a straight applique on front. But, I mean, you can see, compare these two, right? That would look pretty stupid if I just stopped there going around the circle, right? What's the purpose of doing a circle in the first place? So we need another hole, which means we're going to recycle this first hole that we started in right at the beginning. So if you're keeping track, this is the third pass through that one hole. And this is why we've got to be so careful about overstretching the holes. Because we keep on using them like this. Got to be real ginger-like with this one. Okay, there. So now we're up. On the outside, get that straightened up. This is one of the things that happens when you've gone a number of passes through the same hole, is the hole starts to take a shape of its own and it wants to twist your thonging one direction or the other. So it can be a little more difficult to get that straight and square. But straight and square is exactly what we want. So I'm going to catch this under here, under the loop, pull to the outside, keep the green side up. Okay. Now we need another place to go down. It's going to reuse that hole as well. But remember this tag. We want to take that, and it's probably going to be easy to see if I pull that out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Fold it under. Okay. See how that's folded under there?
Mm-hmm.
Now when I pull it tight, it's just hiding under that lacing. Okay. Now I'm going to reuse the second hole. When we're widening these holes that have been used a couple of times, you also want to be really careful that you're not piercing the thonging or ripping it sideways. Okay. Just like that. And now we've completed the pattern all the way around. And it looks pretty even. It's more even than the first one because my thong didn't stretch out. On a small circle like this, there's always going to be some unevenness. Nothing's ever going to be perfectly perfect. Like right here, there's a little bulge because I've got 4 passes through that one hole, so it bulges out a little more than these others. Some of that's going to be a thing. And when you're working with buckskin, stretchy leather, hand-cut thong, you're going to have some variability, right? If you don't want any variability, go to a leather supplier and get some, fine milled veg tan, consistent thickness, consistent stretch, something like that, and do it up with that. But once you do that, you lose the washability of the garment, right? So in some of these things, there is peace in acceptance. And now to tuck the end, I'm going to go on the back. I'm going to tuck it under. It's a bit easier to do with this one. Tuck it under 3 or 4 of these, and snip it off, such as I've done here. This one I tucked it all the way around, right? Again, I want, you can see there's the end. Here, this is where I ended. There's where the tag is sticking out, right? So I tucked it there. You can see all the way around, and then it sticks out the back. Okay. Once again, this is going to be slid in and out of a loop, such as this, and I want to make sure that it doesn't come undone. You can, of course, you did it, you made your own garment. If you made it, you can fix it, right? You now have that knowledge and that skill because you did it in the first place. but we don't want to be fixing it on a regular basis. So I'm going to tuck this, get it straightened out, cut off, nice and happy. And then I'm going to cut, not nearly as wide as this, but I'm going to cut a little strap. I'm going to stitch it on there with that herringbone stitch, okay, right about there, onto this main panel of the pocket. This hide has a hole, and addressing this hole is the next thing I want to do on this shirt front. I've been going back and forth and think of a couple different ways to attach these pockets. I've ended up at the conclusion I'm just going to attach this the same as this. So we'll stitch around here. You can see I've already laid out a lot of the lines and marks and punched most of the holes. We will stitch that exactly as we did here, and the top right across here is exactly as we did on the top pockets. But before I do this and have the pocket and the flap in the way, I want to address this hole. Now, hides have holes. Even a perfect pristine hide, you can get processing holes, you can get little cuts from skinning it. Yeah, and deer hides, because of how deer hides come to us, usually have holes from the process. So hides have holes. It's part of the character of using this material. And, you know, think about like a woodworker working with a highly figured, beautiful board that has a little raw pocket on it. What are they going to do? They're going to put in a Dutchman, a little decorative patch. And that's what I want to do here as well. I'm not going to try and hide the fact that there's a hole here. I want to put a patch on it, but I want to put a patch that is going to be beautiful and add to the character of the shirt rather than detract from it and look like I just patched something. Okay? So I'm going to do a diamond weave on top of this little rectangle of fabric. It's related to this type of stitching, but it's a little bit more ornamental. Also, I'm doing this because it will let me cover a larger area, a wider area, and have it covered completely, whereas this this sort of herringbone stitch is, you know, just for narrow overlaps and a narrow span. This will give me a wider span. Now, I've seen a number of different ways of doing this, and all of them have things about it that I don't really like. So I sat down, and I fiddled with it with some cardboard and rope until I got a method that I liked. Don't be afraid to do that. Just because a stitch was written up in a book in one way doesn't mean that's the only way you can do it. So we're going to do this herringbone stitch, or this diamond braid, my way. We're going to start by taking a piece of thonging and pointing both ends and passing both ends through the back. Okay, so we're going to get just a straight bar across from these two starting points. My thonging here is cut a little bit thicker, a little wider than most, so I'm going to have to open up these holes a little bit extra. It's going to be a little tougher to pull through. And again, that's because I'm closing up a wider area. I want to try and keep them as even as possible. I've got a fat spot there that doesn't want to pull. So pull it back a little, figure out what the problem is. Right where there's a little 90 that's catching there. So right where that spot is, I'm just going to ease it over a bit. Thin it here a little bit too. And this is sort of the slightly tricky part about using this sort of thonging is it doesn't behave the same way depending on the thickness. So you can cut it all the same, exactly the same thickness starting out. And then as you work with it, different sections will stretch different degrees and cause issues. Okay. So now the next thing I'm going to do is a simple crossover in the next stitch down. I'm just going to make an X. So crossing over the middle, going down the opposite side in the next hole. And I'm going to do this from both sides. We don't want to pull this real tight. We definitely don't want a curlicue in it. Top. Pull that twist through. Because I have a fairly wide thong going through a fairly small hole, it's going to pucker a little bit right where it enters the leather. That's fine. Not worried about that. I just don't want a big old twist in it. Flat materials like this do like to twist. Now when I'm pulling this tight, I like to pinch the entry I'm pulling against and then just pull tight into the pinch, and that prevents it from puckering too bad. Okay, so there's the first X. Now I'm going to take both of these and we're going to backstitch. Okay, get it all straightened. Now, we are going to cross again, but we're going to go into the second hole, okay, from both sides. And this is where we start weaving. So when I take this piece, the one closest to me, and I go into this second hole, I need to look at what I am crossing over, and I can see that this piece is under. It's under the other. So this needs to go under this. So I have an over and an under in that pass. Okay? Just use this little bone awl / fid to pass that under there. Okay. And then this piece needs to go, because this is on top here, so it needs to be on the bottom. So the new piece is on the top. But this is on the bottom, so it needs to be on the top. I'm going to pull that back, go over this one, and then under that one. Okay? And that's the start of our weave. Now take each of these, pass them through the hole. So you can see that first weave. This one we went under and then over. This one we went over and then under and through. Now to set up for the next weave, we're going to backstitch. So now we're back at the top and we're going to do the same thing. This one is over, so it's going to be under. So that's going to be pulling that over. Then this one is going to go under here. Get the twist out of it. and then it's going to be over top of the opposing lace. Okay, and then those will go down the holes like that. Okay, we've used up our holes, but we haven't quite finished the pattern. We're going to back stitch one more time. There's our final back stitch. Then we're going to reuse these last two holes. So it'll be over, and this one, no, I'm sorry, that'll be under here. And into there. This will be over, under, and into there. And that'll give a nice squared off finish. Okay, so there's our little patch. All finished up. A nice little weave. And we've covered the hole with this bit of decorative stitching. Now, to completely finish it off, it's just going to be a function of just, tucking these back in, and you don't have to go crazy with that because this is not under any stress, right? We're not tugging on this. It's not holding a pocket together. It's not holding different pieces of the cloth together. It's just a decorative applique stitch to hide that little hole, okay? And we're going to then continue adding these big pockets in the same way we did these little pockets, and we'll look back at it when that's done. All of these pockets are finished now, all sewn on nice. I really like how this is coming. Now again, this is a modern pattern that we're adapting to use with a traditional material. If you're looking for true old school traditional projects, we also have a tutorial for these on the channel, the leggings, that we put up, about 2 months ago, okay? And on the Patreon, there is a compilation of historic sources on leather tanning and working, which is a lot of information on traditional projects. That is free to all patrons at any level. So if you're interested in supporting the channel and get that info, pop on over, link in the description. Now, this pretty much concludes the assembly of the front panels. Okay. Yes, these flaps need turned in. We need to add buttons yet, but that's the very, very last step in the shirt. The next thing that we need to do is to assemble the back panels. And because of the nature of the hides that I have, I'm going to have to do a little bit more like I did up on this front yoke. So it does have a yoke in the back designed into the pattern, but I'm going to have to do a little bit more cutting, piecing, and adding in order to work around some holes in the pieces of leather that I got. In the process of putting all those back panels together, we'll introduce some new stitches, at least new to this project, that we haven't demonstrated in this project yet. And I hope that you will come and join us for that little bit here at Old Ways Rising Farm. Have a blessed day, everybody.